Welcome to IVF This, episode 166, IVF and Judgment. Hello, my beautiful friends. I hope you are all doing so well. I can't believe we are now less than 10 episodes from 175, which means we're like so close to 200 that, I'm not great at math, so don't ask me to do the fast math on what that would mean, but that's just insanity to me. How far we've come. In November, it will actually be 4 years of IVF This, which is also insane to me. I'm so incredibly grateful for the people who have listened and maybe have kind of gone on because they maybe got their family or they decided to shift directions. The people who hang out with me routinely, the people who share the podcast with people that they love and care about and want to either like help them understand what the IVF experience is like, or maybe the person that they're sharing with is also going through something similar. I'm just overwhelmed with gratitude for all of you. So thank you so much. I want to remind everyone, it's been a while. I think I had a lot of my days kind of muted over the last few months, with it being summer and travel and all that stuff. But my calendar is back open for particularly the Take Back Your Life call, which is my my hour-long call just for you, whatever you want. If you want, just to chat, if you want coaching on something, if you want to know what it would be like to work together, if you want to do all of those things, we have that time set aside for just you. So you can go and schedule the IVF This Take Back Your Life call. And you can do that either on my website, www.ivfthiscoaching.com, or on my Instagram or Facebook profiles. There is a link in my bio to do just that. So check that out. If you've been on the fence, there really is no pressure to continue working together at all. There are many people that I, meet once. I have the pleasure of meeting once, and then I never hear from them again. And I hope that they got everything that they need from our time together, or exactly what they needed in that moment with our time together. And then there are some people who I have the honor and privilege of getting to work with for sometimes long periods of time, which I absolutely love. So there is no pressure. There's not going to be like a massive sales pitch at the end of that thing. I want to show you how I do things, what you can benefit from. And then I always want you to make a choice from a place that feels really, really good, not because someone was trying to sell you snake oil or something like that. So that is always available to you. And if you are looking, I know I'm in Texas, so I'm in US Central Time. If you're looking at my calendar and maybe the times just don't work, those times are not like set in stone. So if you don't find a time that works for your schedule, please reach out to me. You can email me at hello@ivfthiscoaching.com and let me know, hey, I am in maybe Sydney, Australia, and those times are, at 2 a.m. Can we work something out as far as scheduling or something like that? I'm pretty flexible as long as I have, about a week's notice or something. We can make it happen. So I don't want you to feel like, disheartened because a time that might work better for you is not on there. It's a collaborative effort. This is totally a group effort. So feel confident and comfortable that I am inviting you to email me and talk about that. All right. So today we're going to talk about judgment, what judgments are, why they're actually a really important part of being a human being, when they go too far, and the types of judgments that I tend to see with my clients. And we're going to start like unpacking them. Now, this is unofficially part one of a two-part series because the next week we're going to talk about openness and just the idea and understanding of being open to something, which is like directly related to judgment. So it's not a part one or part two, but unofficially, under the rug, low key, it is a part one of part two. So first and foremost, you're going to hear me repeat this several times over, but it is entirely normal to be judgmental at times. Being judgmental is a natural human tendency rooted in our instincts to evaluate situations, people, and experiences to navigate the world safely. It is an evolutionary survival adaptation. However, right, it's important to recognize when judgmental thoughts become harmful or unhelpful to both you and others, right? Because most of us keep our judgmental thoughts to ourselves, especially within the context of IVF and infertility. We kind of keep that all inside. Maybe we have one or two people that we really share it with. So your judgmental thoughts might not hurt others because they can't feel your judgment unless you're acting on that judgment, unless you're behaving in a way that is based on that judgment. But you can. You can feel that judgment. You can feel that resentment, that discomfort of feeling when the scales have tipped from normal, natural judgment. Now we've kind of overcorrected to where we're being judgmental in a way that does not serve us. And so that's kind of what we're talking about. When I'm going to give you the examples a little bit later, that's where I'm directed. We'll repeat several times. Judgment is a normal, natural human instinct. Okay. I think a lot of us understand that judgment often stems from our own insecurities, fears, or unmet needs. And it can be a way of protecting ourselves from perceived threats or discomfort. Remember, it's an evolutionary survival adaptation. Okay. So it is always going to be about protecting us from something. For example, when we judge others harshly, it might be because we're feeling vulnerable or uncertain about something going on in our lives. That's a very broad generalization. I'm going to get into more specific judgments around infertility and IVF, but you get the idea, right? So when I repeat that it's a normal, natural part of being a human, I want you to understand that it's not inherently a bad thing. However, it can be harmful, again, to both you, which is a lot of what we talk about in this podcast. I'm not really that concerned with how other people experience you. I'm much more concerned with how you experience you and how you experience the world. But it can be harmful to you and those around you when done in excess or when there is such a rigidity to your judgments. Judgments are described from like a clinical or psychological reference point as a form of a cognitive distortion. Now, if you've never heard this phrase, cognitive distortion, before, it's not a problem. I'm going to give you a crash course, but only really how they tie to judgment. So it's going to be a snapshot of what cognitive distortions are. I might do a full standalone episode on cognitive distortions because there's like 15 or 20 different ways that we can have or experience cognitive distortions and what that can look like in our lives and how it really affects our thinking and things like that. But for right now, in general, cognitive distortions are like mental filters or lenses through which you see the world. But very often, especially if you are just very new to like healing work or self-introspection, mindfulness, therapy, coaching, very often these lenses can be distorted or inaccurate, right? But if we've never done a lot of self-work, then we don't know that they're distorted and that they're inaccurate. And that's kind of where the trouble lies. But they are ways of thinking that are biased, exaggerated, overly negative, and those things can lead to misunderstandings, emotional distress, and just kind of unhealthy behaviors. So imagine you're looking through a pair of glasses that make everything seem darker or blurrier or scarier than they actually are. Cognitive distortions are similar. They make situations, ourselves, or others seem worse or more extreme than they really are. So here's a breakdown. First, there are unrealistic thought patterns. Cognitive distortions are patterns of thinking that kind of twist and morph your reality. They often make us feel and believe things that aren't fully true. Like thinking if I make one mistake, I'm a total failure, or everyone is out to get me, or nobody has my back, or something like that, right? Not saying that those emotions aren't valid, but the cognition behind, the thought behind it might be a little bit disproportionate to what's actually happening, right? The second important thing to remember about cognitive distortions is that they are automatic and subconscious. These thoughts often happen automatically, like even faster than snapping. It is milliseconds when these thoughts are populating in our head, and very often we don't even realize it. They can be deeply ingrained habits of thought that we just develop over time, or often as a way of coping with stress or negative experiences. The third thing is that they can truly impact our emotions and behaviors, right? So if you've listened to me for any length of time, you know that I follow a think, feel, do model. That's how I approach a lot of the cognitive works, right? So you have a thought, that creates a feeling, and that feeling drives your action. So if your thought is distorted and it makes you feel like something is very stressful or negative or bad or horrible, right? It's being conflated or something like that. That's automatically going to influence your mood, your emotions. Your emotions will influence your behavior, right? So it has a tremendous impact on your emotions and your behavior. So when you think in these distorted ways, it affects how you feel and act. For example, if we believe that everyone's judging us, we might feel anxious or avoid social situations, even if that belief isn't true, right? Even one of the cognitive distortions is mind reading. And that's a really big thing within the infertility and IVF community. It's one of the biggest reasons that we self isolate. And I think that we spend so much time thinking about what other people think about us when they really don't. Like, they really don't think about us nearly as often as we think they think about us. Kind of a meta-analysis, but I think you're tracking. So here are the examples of some cognitive distortions, again, that are most common when we talk about judgment. Black and white thinking. I did a whole podcast episode on this. It was pretty early on, so you might have to go looking for it, but it is literally called black and white thinking. And that is thinking in extremes, that everything is right or wrong, yes or no, true or false. Overgeneralization, which I think most of us kind of understand, but it's making broad, sweeping judgments based on a single event or limited evidence. For example, if this is the first time you're meeting someone and they ask the dreaded, "Do you have any kids?" Question, and maybe, right, just depending on a lot of different factors, mostly where your brain and where your emotions, your body are at that time, you could leave that conversation believing that they are a rude and thoughtless person, when that might not be the case, right? If they don't know anything about you, maybe it's just an icebreaker sort of a situation. They could have just been asking that because it is like a colloquial or a common way to start conversations within the United States. For reasons passing my understanding, that is above my pay grade to understand why that has to be a topic of conversation, or seems to be a common topic of conversation. Anyway, don't trip over my soapbox, because I could go on and on about that one. But that is an idea of overgeneralization. Mental filtering is another one, which is when you solely or mostly, I guess, solely or mostly focus on negative aspects of a situation or a person while ignoring the positives. When I used to be the manager of case management at one of the hospitals here in Austin, there were a few employees who not everyone got along with. And I had feedback from one of my employees who, now that we don't work together, we've actually become really wonderful friends. And one of the things that she would tell me was that I look for the good in everyone, right? I don't like everyone all the time. People don't like me all the time. And I'm totally comfortable with that. I'm very grounded with that. But one of the things that I do believe is that the vast majority of humans in this world have good in them, right? I don't like to make always or never sort of comments. So I won't say that every human being in this world has good in them. But I think that the vast majority, most of us, 99.99999% of us have good in us. And I think that, part of my work in the world is to see that in people, especially people who may not see that in themselves. But mental filtering, that is something that every person has. I have it, but I actively work against it. So the next one would be what I was talking about earlier, mind reading. I think this is pretty self-explanatory again, but it's when you assume that you know what others are thinking, and very often interpreting their thoughts and actions in a negative or judgmental way. Right. So it's not just like, oh, they think that I'm a lovely friend. No, it's like, oh, they think that I'm a neglectful piece of crap. And that's probably true. The thought is it's probably true. It's not actually a fact. Just wanted to make sure that I added that caveat real quick. So the next one would be shoulding on yourself. So this involves holding yourself or others to a set of very rigid or unrealistic expectations, which then lead to judgment when those expectations generally are not met, right? And it often comes with things like, they should do this, I should do this, I should be doing more, all of that, right? And then the last one is personalization. And this is when you take things so personally and assume that other people's behaviors or events are directly related to you, which again leads to self-judgment or judgment of others, right? Again, judgment is a normal, natural human condition. However, judgment can be a cognitive distortion that often involves seeing the world through this distorted lens that amplifies negative perceptions and reduces your capacity for balanced and compassionate thinking for both you and other people. So I'm going to share some judgments, some common theme judgments that I hear from my clients. I'm going to split these into two categories, mostly because that's just how I make sense of them in my mind. So there's the judgments that people, and maybe even you or your family at some point, have had about IVF, right? Because I think a lot of us get judgmental comments from other people. And so that's going to be one section. And then the second section is, because we're all human and none of us are perfect, that we as people going through infertility, going through IVF, have about people who aren't on the same journey or who have not experienced what we have experienced, which can include infertility, IVF, other assisted reproductive interventions, maybe recurrent pregnancy loss, miscarriage, things like that, right? We are not perfect. We will have judgments about people who have not experienced those things or seemingly have not experienced those things. Now, my little disclaimer, these are not meant to call anyone out or for you to pass judgment on anyone, including yourself. These are things that you might not have ever considered judgments because, again, a lot of these things are subconscious for us. So all we're trying to do is create awareness. When we have awareness and insight into why we do what we do, it's then that we get to intentionally decide if this is something we want to continue doing or not. We always have the choice, and that's the whole point. So judgments around IVF can vary wildly, often influenced by social, cultural, and personal beliefs. But here are some common judgments that people have about IVF. The judgment about its quote unquote naturalness. Some people believe that conceiving a child through IVF is unnatural. This can lead, right, when people talk about it or make comments, things like that, this can lead us to feeling shame or inadequacy for those of us who undergo fertility treatments, if they're maybe less of a parent or less deserving, or that their parenthood is somehow less valid, okay? Judgments about worthiness. This is a really big one for if you've been on a really long infertility journey. This comes up a lot. It also can come up without having an infertility journey because worthiness is one of those deeply ingrained belief systems that we have, generally that we are not. But anyway, there is this misconception that only certain people deserve to have children, whether due to age, financial status, lifestyle choices. Judgments about playing God. This was actually a really big judgment or concern of my own husband when we first started talking about going through IVF, which would have been 2016. So some view IVF as interfering with nature or divine will, considering it playing God. Now, if that is someone's belief system, it is not for me to say that that is right or wrong. What I generally ask is, what are their feelings on things like chemotherapy? What are their assumptions on like things like open heart surgery or even antibiotics, which also interferes with nature and divine will. Whatever your answer is and however you feel about that, that's not an opinion for me to have. But when we talk about like playing God or the naturalness of it, that's typically where my mind goes. Judgments about success rates. I think a lot of us have these both inside IVF and outside, but there's often pressure for IVF to quote unquote work very quickly, right? The assumption that if it doesn't, something is wrong with the person undergoing treatment. There is an innate judgment around the woman or the female in the relationship. The person with the ovaries and the uterus is the predominant reason for infertility, right? And that has been a cultural and social concept that has gone on from the dawn of time. Infertility, barrenness, I hate that word, it makes me cringe, but barrenness has always been the social judgment of women, historically, contemporarily. And what we know now is that it is broken up into thirds, right? A third of the cases are female factor infertility, a third of the cases are male factor infertility, and a third of the cases are kind of the bucket of yuck of unknown infertility. But that is still a pretty prevailing issue. Like one of my very dear friends who is a nurse, when we were talking about going through IVF, I didn't know her when I went through IVF the first time. I knew her when I went through IVF the second time for our third kiddo. She actually asked me like, okay, what was, not what was your deal in those sort of words. She was very kind of awkward and kind of clunky about it, but that was the subtext. And she didn't even know, after many years of being a nurse, on like postpartum, I think she did postpartum nursing. Now that's not a jab at her. That is a jab at the kind of the medical system and social constructs as we know them. There can be questions about the child's origin. Is it really your kid? And especially with individuals who use donor material, that is a massive judgment that they worry about and very likely experience. Judgment about age. Older women in particular face a lot of judgment, self-judgment and judgment from society for pursuing IVF with the assumption that they are too old to be parents, and that they're almost selfish for wanting a child in later life. They can go kick rocks with that one. Judgments about single or same-sex partners wanting, there's already judgments around same-sex partners, and there's already judgment around like single moms, but believing that children need a traditional family structure. Those people can also go kick rocks. That it's an easy solution. Those people are comically uninformed, but that it's an easy solution to infertility and underestimating the emotional, physical, and financial toll it takes. I realize that I'm editorializing through these. I'm kind of, see, it's happening in real time. I'm making judgments, just reading the judgments. Woo! Your coach is coaching herself right now. Okay. And then there's a lot of judgment around the emotional responses that we have, right? People may judge how someone emotionally responds to IVF, whether they think that person is too hopeful or too negative or too obsessed with the process. And that judgment can invalidate the very real emotions for people going through IVF. And conversely, some of the judgments that we have towards people who might not be experiencing infertility or going through IVF, and I say might not be because we don't genuinely know unless someone tells us. But these judgments can often stem from deep feelings of emotional pain, frustration, and a sense of isolation that very often accompanies the infertility journey. So some of those are about taking fertility for granted. Maybe this perception that people who conceive easily don't appreciate the gift of fertility, or they take it for granted. Judgments about insensitivity. People without fertility struggles may be seen as insensitive or unaware of the pain that comments or actions can cause, such as asking when someone plans to have children, our favorite question, or making the assumptions about family planning. Judgment about a lack of understanding. There may be a sense that those who haven't struggled with infertility simply can't understand the emotional, physical, and financial toll it takes. And to a degree, I agree with that judgment, but I also don't think that someone has to experience exactly what we've experienced to show us love and support. Anyway, I'm editorializing again. I apologize. So judgment about effortlessness. People who conceive easily might be seen as having like an easy life in comparison, leading to the judgment that they don't have to work as hard for their happiness or their family. And we never really know what someone is struggling with. Judgment about unsolicited advice. I have to take a deep breath for this because unsolicited advice, a big trigger for me, inside infertility and out. Those who haven't experienced infertility offer unsolicited advice or opinions on how to conceive, which can feel dismissive and oversimplified. And then judgments about family size. Maybe people who have multiple children without difficulty may be judged as overly fertile. I've actually called my beloved sister-in-law overly fertile in jest, but when I was in that situation, I realized it was actually not. It was very much a judgment on her. And that led to a sense of unfairness that so many people can have children while others struggle to have them. There's judgments about ideal timing, accidental pregnancies, maybe parents who don't quite meet our expectations in terms of how they choose to live their life and things like that. So most all of these judgments can be rooted in pain, frustration, and the emotional turmoil that accompany infertility. I'll say it one more time. Judgments are a normal, natural response. They're part of being human. And while these natural responses to difficult situations, it's important to recognize the feelings and work towards compassion. Like you can accept this is how I'm feeling, this is what I'm feeling, and all of those things, and working towards compassion for yourself and others to avoid emotional harm and isolation. And this last part, which is why I wanted to write this episode, because the more deeply entrenched that we get in our judgment, especially around our experience, oftentimes leads to additional pain and suffering. We've got more than enough pain during this journey. We don't need to add on. And that's why I wanted to write this episode. So when we are unpacking and releasing judgment, while acknowledging that it's a normal human experience, it's actually a really delicate process that involves a lot of self-compassion, awareness, and intentional action. So here are some suggestions just to get you started. I want you to acknowledge your judgments without shame. When we talk about judgment, or when we talk about, holding our feelings or our thoughts without judgment, that's considered holding space. You're going to hold space for your judgment, just saying, I recognize that I am being judgmental, right? I do have judgments about this person or the situation or this environment, right? But we can acknowledge these thoughts without immediately trying to push them away or judge ourselves for having them. Remind yourself that being judgmental is a natural human response. And it doesn't make you a bad person. It simply reflects your current state of mind or emotions. That's all we're talking about. It is a reflection of your current state of mind or emotions. The next step would be practicing self-compassion. I just want you to recognize that judging is part of the human experience and being gentle with yourself as you work through it. Harsh self-criticism only deepens our judgmental cycle, right? When I said deeply entrenched, that is because the cycle of judgment and shame just feed into each other. And so reminding yourself that it's okay to have these thoughts, even while you're working to understand and releasing them, is okay, right? Again, it doesn't make you a bad person. It is just a reflection of your mental and emotional state. Phrases like, it's okay to feel this way, I'm learning to be more compassionate to myself or others, those kind of thoughts can be helpful to just have at the ready. You can spend some time exploring the root of your judgment, asking yourself where this judgment is coming from. Is it rooted in my own insecurities, my fears, my past experiences? Sometimes judgments are just a way of projecting our inner struggles onto others. I want you to challenge your judgments, right? Is this judgment really true? Is there evidence to support it, or is it based on an assumption, which is another cognitive distortion, right? Challenging the validity of your judgments can help you see them in a different light. I want you to think about the alternative explanations for a situation. And this can just kind of open up your mind to different possibilities. And when you do that, it can reduce the intensity of the judgment that you feel either towards someone else or yourself. And finally, release the need to be right. So the last part is that work of my life, because often judgments are tied to a desire to be right or in control of how you or other people behave. When you recognize that it's okay to let go of this need and to accept things as they are, even if they don't align with your expectations, right? Because people are okay with accepting things the way they are if they maybe don't have expectations or have really low expectations. But if accepting that something is the way it is, while it does not align with your expectations, is really challenging. So be patient with yourself, be gentle with yourself. People will people, right? And the more comfortable you are, the more compassionate you are for others and yourself, the easier it is going to be to navigate some of these more challenging situations. Now, I want you to understand the expectation is that this has never been and will never be about perfection. Releasing judgment isn't about being perfect. You're not going to get it right 100% of the time. I probably only get it right 50% of the time, and I think that's a pretty damn good batting average. That's what we're focusing on. It's just about progress, right? Changing the way that you're feeling a little bit by a little bit by a little bit so that you like the person that you are, you respect the person that you are, and you can congratulate and just adore who you are and how you show up in this world. That's the end game. Okay? So, and there is not a person living that has zero judgment. The point of understanding this is to know that when judgment goes too far, when it crosses a line from being a natural human response to becoming harmful, hurtful, destructive, limiting to either you or other people. Okay? All right. No, nothing's perfect. That's not the expectation. So that is what I have for you today, my beautiful friends. I hope you have a wonderful week, and I will talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of IVF This. If you like what you've heard, click subscribe and follow to make sure you don't miss an episode. And if you want to learn more, head over to www.ivfthiscoaching.com to learn how to work together.